Welcome to my Only One Outlier podcast show, where I'll be exploring the data science career tips with the industry experts who can share their experience and journey with us. I am your host Nirmal, from a new grad to an early career data scientist, from a data analyst to a data engineer, or anyone who wants to start or transition their career into data science. We will bring you all the do's and don'ts to help you guide in your data career path. All right, welcome everyone. Today I have a special guest on my podcast show, Only One Outlier. I am actually very thrilled to welcome Matthew Fisher to my show. We'll call him Matt. Matt is a dynamic leader in machine learning, data science, and analytics, with his unique passion for blending innovation, data, and business strategy. His career journey has been from digital marketing, e-commerce, in the Seattle, biggest company in e-commerce, which is Amazon. He has been ex-Amazon. And then he has also worked for another big company that I'm currently part of, which is Microsoft. And he's also a co-founder and CTO in a company that he just launched, and it's called Daydream, and we'll talk a little bit about it. And he's also an adjunct staff member in the Brown University. So he's also have a passion for teaching, sharing knowledge. I see him sharing quite a bit of good information and blogs on LinkedIn as well. And we'll talk about some of his knowledge sharing and what's happening on the LLM industry today. Welcome, Matt, to my show. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, very excited to be part of this and have a good conversation today.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we'll get a lot of information or the in-depth knowledge from you. I will let you, I just did a brief one, based on your profile and what I know about you, but I kind of wanted to know a little bit more, so just to tell us something about your journey in tech. How did you end up in data science and that kind of, story?
Yeah, I have I've had a very interesting journey to get to where I am. I never thought I would be actually in engineering or in data. My undergrad was at Washington State University, go Cougs. I did a dual degree. I started out thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, specifically a lawyer in the music industry, IP law, to be exact. And so I went down this path. Wazoo had a program called Media and the Law. It was the inaugural kickoff of that when I was there. And so it was a dual track where it was communications and pre-law. And so I very much was excited. I went down that path. The Murrow School at Wazoo was fantastic. And as I was approaching graduation, one of my best friends had just graduated 2 years before me and was in law school and gave me the advice saying, don't be a lawyer. It's not what you think it is. Don't go down that path. So I really thought hard about it. I ended up taking the LSATs. I ended up getting into a school here in Seattle, UW, for law. I chose not to go. And I kind of took a step back and thought about where I wanted to be. It was late 2007, 2008. Mm-hmm. It was not a great time for people to graduate from school and look for work in the workforce. In Seattle, it was still okay. I ended up joining a very small startup here in Seattle. I was employee number 4. And they needed me to do everything, right? And so that was be on the phones for sales, go build a website, handle some of their accounting stuff, do everything. And what I realized really quickly is I actually like the building side, right? So some of the product management and the actual hands-on building of, basic HTML websites. Right. And furthermore, I found that I really liked the marketing side of that, of digital marketing and what I could do with it. So I kind of pursued that a little in my career, and I went down and I investigated how I can get more deeply integrated into what digital marketing was. And I joined a company called drugstore.com, which Walgreens now owns. And I led a lot of their digital marketing work, from search to I helped with some email stuff, and then really took on the marketplace program. Amazon Marketplace was just becoming a big thing at that point. And I dove a little deeper into that. And with that came a whole bunch of analytic work that I had to do and understand. And I realized at that moment that it came very easy to me, right? I understood the numbers. I understood, how you needed to compile some of the raw data to then have a different view of it. I never loved math in school. I was good at it. I got good grades, but I never loved it. But this was the first time where it kind of clicked for me. Data makes sense. I really like data. I'm going to see what I can do. And it kind of progressed from there, right? Like every point in my career, I joined Microsoft after that. I worked on the Bing team early in the Bing years and kind of went really deep on that, right? And I was a PM. I led a function that we were building internally for some tools and some of the monetization algorithms. And I just kind of built my knowledge set on data, right? And I kept picking up more and I kept wanting to learn. I'm a big believer of the learn it all mentality, right? And so self-learning and pushing myself and how you approach that. And I just kind of picked it up. And then came more responsibilities and more kind of functions as I picked up knowledge sets on the data side of tools or functions and grew that. It just kind of evolved into a data science full-time focus, right? And being at Microsoft, there's tons of opportunities, as you know, where you get to dabble in a little bit of everything. And the more I fell into the data science path, I took on more opportunities in there. So I ended up moving into the office group where I led a data science and ML team. I loved that. I picked up more knowledge and really understood some of the more advanced sides of data science. And at that point, I decided to go back and get my master's, specifically in AI and data science and machine learning. And I found a program at Brown where I was working full time. I knew I wanted to do this. I had a 2-year-old and I was like really trying to figure out, can I actually get my master's? And I found a program at Brown. It was for executives. So you had to be, N number of years into your career. And it was hybrid. So it was part-time on campus, part-time remote. And it was a specific focus around engineering, math, science, and technology. And then they had an underpinning of leadership as well. And so it was this very comprehensive master's. It was a master's in engineering. My focus was on AI ethics. So I went deep on the AI ethics side. My thesis was all about like how do you build a system to identify bias in code and what you could do with it. And I loved it. It was a 2-year program. I crushed through it while working and with a growing family. My wife is amazing for putting up with me while I did that.
Yeah.
And after that, I went full bore right into the AI and ML and DS world. And that's kind of where I am today, right? Like I love this intersection of how do you blend a data science model with a real-time product application and build an ecosystem that works and hums nicely. And so I think the tracks of data science, machine learning, AI, generative AI are unique in their disciplines, but they're melding into kind of one, utility that you have to understand all of them today to really play a part in that. So it's been this really wild journey of thought I was going to be a lawyer to, founding a company, an AI company, so I love it. I still am learning every day. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up still. So the more I learn, the more I figure it out.
No, I mean that's amazing journey. Thanks for sharing that. I did not know. I think most of it, and it was interesting. I knew you were a data science leader when where you were in Microsoft the first time I get connected with you. I think you said a couple things very interesting. One was graduating on the hard time, be very challenging, but it will tell us how to adapt or how to find different ways. So I also graduated in 2009. I came to US on 2007, and I quickly figured out that it's hard. But I mean the challenges that I faced at that point of time kind of was testament for me, right? So and then I like your journey a little bit more, that you always had an engineering in parallel with you. So it was whether being working at Amazon as a front end side, you mentioned you got some knowledge and hands-on of HTML coding, and also then you did some PM with the Microsoft. And I think I always felt in data science career that the product side or the product sense is extremely important, and most of the times I suggest my mentees also that, hey, don't just work on the model or in any data science product without realizing the business value or how does it kind of tie back to the product, right? Ultimately, that is what you need to understand. So I think you always brought the product management with you and engineering with you, and then going into the data science with that knowledge always helps, in my opinion. So it's probably led to you where you are today.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the product side having at least some experience or exposure to
Yeah.
product, program, or project, right? Because the P can mean many things in PM,
Mhm.
is significantly helpful for data scientists in the context of this, or machine learning engineers or AI engineers, in that the challenge with this body of work we live in is you can make the data say whatever you want, right? Like that's the dirty truth of data science. And
Yeah.
having some sense of understanding of like, what is the scope, what is the mission of the work you're looking at, and what is the milestones you want to hit when you're building a model, when you're thinking of logging, when you're thinking of tracking, when you're thinking of metrics you want to monitor. Like having that PM hat to wear, at least in an understanding, is so helpful because it puts guardrails around what you're building, right?
Right.
You know
Right.
what the goal is, who's working on it, and how to go. And it's not always the case where as a data scientist or an MLE, you have a PM you get to work with. So I like always, as I'm building teams or being a part of a team, I look at who's done what in the past, right? To make sure that we have the right disciplines of the team. It's not just the classical, can you
Right.
open a Jupyter notebook and write a bunch of functions in there. You have to understand a lot more.
Yeah. 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 I totally get it. I think in my own career, I realized that the importance, and that's why I brought it up, because sometimes I was probably more keen on investing more time only on the ML side, or picking up the how I make my model perform better, and I never realized that there's additional metrics attached to it, which is directly attached to the product, which is business metrics, right? So regardless of my model being 90%, 99% accurate, is there's no business value, then I think it's hard to convince the
Yeah.
leadership uh, to make a decision, right? So I think that's very important. Thanks for bringing that up. I think the product data science role is also getting extremely popular these days, and that could be one reason that the companies are understanding the value that, hey, if we bring only the data scientist who is very, his skill set is heavily inclined towards only the tech and ML focused, that might not be helpful for some of these roles. So they are bringing the product attached to it and called product data scientist, right? So
Yeah, I
which
think
makes sense.
also the evolution of generative systems, not like just Gen AI, but generative systems. You've kind of seen this with, I think Power BI was one of the early ones where you could query in natural language into the data set and pull it out. I think that advancement is also a blend of the product and data side, where you're seeing ex engineers move into product, right? And that's a pretty common track. And then those product folks taking on a data role because they don't have to have the classically trained experience, at least at a
Right.
very base level. So I think the more these systems and tools evolve, you're going to see that product eng, and eng is kind of comprehensive in my mind of DS and ML. They're going to blend more significantly. And I think that's a trend we'll continue to see evolve.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And then let's switch gear a little bit. Your journey of working with all the big companies, big techs, Amazon, Microsoft, being on your profile, then you thought of doing something on your own, right? So I just wanted to know that kind of path, like what triggered that. Obviously everyone has their own. Someone is like, hey, I was always had that dream. It's also called daydream, right? So just want to learn a little bit about how things went there. I mean, whatever you can share, like you don't have to go deeper if you cannot.
Sure.
But I wanted to understand your transition, or I think maybe more than transition, the decision-making factors, right? And
for sure.
Yeah.
I've been really fortunate to spend a lot of my career at a big enterprise company, whether it was Microsoft or Amazon or Nordstrom. And I spent a very short time at Meta as well, which is another story in and of itself. But I love and admire the big companies because I think they have a different problem that they're trying to solve, which is scale, right? Like not just can you hire and attract great talent and build good products, but how do you do it in an infrastructure way, a marketing way, a sales way, and an operations way that scales to millions or billions of individuals. I love being a part of that like scaling function, which is how do you make it work for, right? An end could be country, language, user size. But that always bumped up against my desire to move fast and my desire to iterate quickly and my desire to test out new things, right? At a large company, you have processes which is totally the right thing to do, which limit how fast you can move and what steps you need to go through. And in my case, how and when I could use models at different times, right? New models that existed. And I've kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit since I was a little kid. Like I would sit outside of my house. I used to live in Florida growing up. I would sit outside of my house. We lived near a golf course. I'd sit on the corner and sell bottled water and soda to golfers. And I think I was like 5 when I started this, right? Because I had this spirit of like, I want to build a company. I want to do something. I wanted like a couple of dollars that I could say I earned. And I've dabbled with the idea over the years of like starting a little incubation lab. I started during the pandemic. I built something called the UV locker. I started a little incubation lab in my house. I built this locker that sits, on the front doorstep. I wrote a bunch of software where it would use computers and it would sterilize packages before it came into your house. And it was like a side project, but it got that entrepreneurial spirit to itch. And I told myself that I would leave a big company and start my own thing or join some group who was starting something if there were 3 things that were true. And I said that to myself like maybe 10 years ago, and I hadn't ever found it. And the 3 things were, is it a market disruption, right? Is it a true market disruption? Not just like a shift in the market, but will it disrupt an entire vertical market? The second was, does it give me the ability to learn and move fast and push the boundaries of what I think is comfortable, right? Which I think any startup should do. And the third was this a case where this was a universal problem, right? So not just a problem for a vertical or a space, but was this a universal problem that anybody that I approached on the street or of any age or any demographic would feel the pain of the problem that I was trying to solve? Those three things had to be true for me. And last year in January, was introduced to some folks, and the problem that they were thinking about solving seemed to hit all 3. Wow. And I was very happy at Microsoft. I loved what I was doing. I was leading an amazing group of teams, some of the smartest people that I'd ever met and worked with. And I still, to this day, think that's true and love watching what they're building from the outside. So I told them, I'm interested in helping you, right? I don't want to leave my job. I love big company life. It's comfortable. We have great benefits. I have a family of 3 kids. So like that's important. And so I started just talking to them over, the next couple of months, giving thoughts and feedback and advice. Maybe not so much advice, just input. And a couple months into that conversation, it started to click for me. Like, I think this is the opportunity. I think this is the opportunity that hits all 3 of those, specifically like market disruption and changing a problem that is universally felt. It made me very uncomfortable, which is a good sign, right? Because that means it's interesting and like you're heading down a path that you feel, could be something. Yeah. And so I had a lot of chats with my wife, and we discussed the pros and cons, and she's incredibly supportive and said, I've never seen you this excited about an opportunity. You should do this. I ended up in July of last year making that decision to leave Microsoft and kind of jumped out of that big world of, comfort, right? So ecosystems of a depth of network of people, depth of, benefits, depth of resources to this blank sheet of paper. And I miss the big enterprise life every day just because it is comfortable. I love the application of being on this blank sheet of paper where every day you get to pull out a new blank sheet of paper and reinvent and build and challenge. And I truly believe what we're doing at Daydream is solving a universal problem, specifically in the fashion vertical where we are, right? So part of what Daydream is it's thinking about and changing e-commerce and shopping online, right? It's a space that we've all become accustomed to over 20 years, but it hasn't really evolved in a way that has kept up with the technology, right? So whether that's the search application or the computer vision application of identification of garments and items, there hasn't been a comprehensive solution for that. And anybody that you ask a question to of, do you enjoy shopping online? The universal answer is like, it's fine, but it's also a pain, right? And that it all clicked, right? And so do I think I might go back to a big enterprise company one day? I don't know. Possibly, right? Like there's so many cool things to build, and at that scale, you don't get that opportunity anywhere else. But I love this startup life and the crazy pace it has and the ability to, it's a new model every day and see what works and put into production. And so I think both options are great. I'm glad I've had this, fortune to try both out.
Try both, yeah.
And they're very, very different, just wildly different experiences.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing. People say that you don't get best out of both choices, but you had at least experienced,
Yes.
So I think it is interesting because the vertical or the problem space, the fashion industry, right? And you said it right. I think me too. Like when I go shopping and I just say that, hey, yeah, whatever I'm looking, I might not spend too much time because if it is only going from the user side, all the inputs and everything, but the same responses is not exactly coming back from the app, then after maybe a minute or two, I'm like, yeah, I'm good with this, and then I order something. There has been many, sometimes like, it's a very simple example, but it might fit the pain with customers is like, at least for me, like with different companies, the size of the t-shirt kind of changes, right? So, and then if there is not a right way to find it, I'm always order large, then, okay, what happened this time? It didn't fit properly.
Yeah.
What happened? It was too big this time, So even simply that kind of feature where, yeah, you just ask a couple options for the user or something, like it could customize or personalize based on that particular brand would just solve the problem, right? So, and that's just
Yeah.
one simple example, but there are probably a ton of the other problems that you are kind of handling. And
Yeah, I've never been a super fashionable person. Specifically,
neither.
like living in the Northwest, like everything I own has an elastic waist, or I like 3 brands and I shop at REI. But the more have uncovered about the fashion or e-commerce related fashion spaces,
Right.
it's an incredibly hard data problem to solve, right? And an incredibly
Yes.
hard engineering problem to solve.
Yes.
And that's where like my love for this space really lives now is normalizing, understanding, subjective terminology of trends, understanding, imagery and how it maps and these crazy colors brands have. Like, how do you think about normalizing that? Like, that is size and color mapping and all this, probably one of the hardest problems I've ever really looked at. It's incredibly difficult. And to
Yes.
do it at scale is such a fun challenge to tackle, right? And so the fashion piece is really interesting and I like that, but the data element and the engineering side is very cool. And then layering on top an AI element of how do you engage with subjective language and understand what individuals mean as it kind of you have this dialogue or these turns back and forth with an agentic system. That's such a fun engineering problem to solve. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what's capable today. Like the world is just scratching the surface. But fashion is such a unique space. And I don't think anybody's really cracked that yet. So it's ripe for an opportunity.
Yeah. Usually, like you said before, even if I have to think about it, when you first, if someone is sharing me for the first time that, they're applying the latest and greatest technology or the ML AI in the fashion, then for a second, maybe I'll think, what are the use cases? What could be potential use cases, right? Then once you try to understand it, there are many, right, to problems to tackle. It's interesting. I think there are many companies, at least now coming up, even the Stitch Fix was one of them that they started customizing the orders, stuff like that, and trying to help customers. One of my connections from LinkedIn, I think he also runs Host AI or something that was also similar to brand and fashion. So, and this Daydream. So I know a few companies now, definitely myself, that they are kind of like trying to solve this common problem, right? So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a hot space, and I think it's awesome to see so many trying to like dive into this space because I think there's so many different ways you can slice and dice this, and that's also the fun thing about fashion in general is like it means something different to everybody and how you want to engage and find and be inspired and discover and buy. Like there's not one solution that's going to work for everybody. So it's a fun world that we're living in right now with how fast technology is evolving and how quick some of these new models are getting deployed that you could apply it to something like a legacy market. Like, I can call it a legacy market because it's been 20 plus years, right? E-commerce. So I think the next few years will be very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks. I think we covered a little bit of fashion industry and the AI mix and Jane's there. So like that. So let's talk about your passion towards, I mean, you obviously have both depth and breadth of knowledge on AI and LLM stuff, how closely you are following the recent whatever has been coming out, with different agents being put together, new findings from LLMs, a lot of open source models coming up, and how's your experience? Because the reason for me to ask this is because you earlier said in a startup setting, you can iterate fast, you can try multiple things, right? So, for example, in Microsoft, even if I want to try Llama model now, right, I may not have that easy path, like you, I want to understand that part of the current LLM and AI breakthroughs that you have been trying or implementing, experimenting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, like candidly, it's very difficult to keep up with everything happening.
Yes.
Because I think every day, I open my news aggregator agent, right, and I have a whole bunch of new models that came out that I should be looking at and testing, and it's impossible to keep up with everything happening. And so that's a blessing and a curse of this world that we're living in, of like there's too much for you to understand and keep track of. And the blessing is you can kind of pick whatever you want and go and investigate. And so the way that I think about it is I look at it in the problem spaces that I'm approaching, and I try and keep very detailed focus on that. So like lately I've been thinking a lot about image segmentation, right? And how do you take a model or an image, use a model to extract and mask an item, and then take that mask and apply it to something or understand it. And so I've been reading a ton of research papers, playing around with all the, open source and some of the closed source stuff on that, and putting my thoughts together on it. And so rather than kind of look across the spectrum and say, can I keep track of everything? I've been really going deep on that. Right now, I lean a little more towards the closed source system. So, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the Googles, from a model perspective, more than the open source ones, just because I do believe open source is going to win out in the long run. But for where we're at, or where I'm at personally, it's an easier test bed, right, for some of the closed source stuff, where I don't have to worry about handling some of the inference stuff or some of the security stuff or some of that. It's just wrapped in, right? So calling a GPT API is very easy, or calling Anthropic's Claude Sonnet, model is much easier than me going to Hugging Face, pulling it down, thinking about how I want to store that in some of the compute. And so that's kind of where I start, right? I look at some of the closed source stuff, specifically, like I also am a fan of running things through larger providers. So like if I'm going to use OpenAI, I go through Azure. If I'm going to use Anthropic, I go through GCP, things like that. Because there's a whole bunch of benefits you get from kind of shifting through and using some of their model weights and all that fun stuff. But I do think in the long run, open source is going to win out, right? I think that's the right approach. I think it's very trendy kind of to say that, I think, and kind of what we've seen with Zuckerberg and others doing it. But I think that's the right way to do it. And because you have more customization, you have more control, you have more flexibility in how you want to adjust weighting and training and things to that sense. Lately, I've had the fortune where I get to play with all of it, right? And so I can say I'm going to go test out, Llama 70 billion, and, pull that down. Or I'm going to play with, the latest 4.0 mini model from OpenAI and kind of blend them all together. And that's where I've been really hot on this idea of agentic systems being the real future. And specifically, I made a post earlier this week around something called MOE, or mixture of experts. And I think this is the future, right? Where you're going to have this blend of open source and closed source, and you're going to have these blends of different agents, which to me, agents are like just really smart APIs. If you kind of think of it in that sense, like they're APIs that have context. And so what I mean by that is, like with an API, you're making a call to a reference and you're calling back for some information, right? And you get that returned as a very, very crude way to explain it. But with an agent, it has context, right? So you give it parameters, it has the ability to think, it has the ability to go call into a RAG system and pull back data, whatever structure you have. Mixture of experts gives you kind of the next level, where rather than having to build these like really intricate agents one by one. So as an example, in an e-commerce setting, and this is not anything Daydream's doing, but just traditional e-commerce, you have fulfillment systems, you have ordering systems, you have sale pricing, you have, search recall, you have a whole bunch of different stacks. And if you want to build agents, you build one by one by one. Mixture of agents gives you the ability to kind of build this full, unique, broad system and have it determine on its own how to call into those systems, right? And so you have these elements that are really finely tuned and trained, and you don't have to individualize so much, right? It gives you the ability to kind of have this one big construct. I am very bullish on this idea that the agentic system, and specifically MOE, will be how the future evolves. And to that extent, like even if I put my futurism hat on, like I think humans will have their own MOE system in, the future, where I have a series of agents under this construct that can do a bunch of my things, like talk to my wife's agent and handle who's going to pick up our kids from school that day, or go figure out grocery shopping, or like all these things that are trained specifically for my benefit. And I think we're going to see it in the enterprise or in, career setting first, but it's going to evolve. And it's a little scary. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie WALL-E, but, in this movie WALL-E, right, like humans devolved almost to an extent where they don't do anything. They don't get up. They don't work. They have computers that do everything. Like, I don't think we're quite going to get there. But I think this MOE system that is just like AI2, the Allen Institute just came out with a leap in this, right, last week. And I think we're pushing the boundaries of the agentic system, which I think people are starting to see the real power of, into this next evolution, which is really, how do you have a whole bunch of expert agents that are glommed together, right? And in that system that lives together, you don't have to give it unique instructions. It can be self-contextualizing and self-learning and self-deterministic. Now we have to be careful on how you build that and what you do with it. But like, I'm very, very bullish on kind of how that system gets set up. I don't think there's enough research yet to make heads or tails of if it's good for production at the current state. But from a research view, like what I've been playing with this week, I can tell you is mind-blowing. Like just things that would have taken months to kind of construct, I was able to do this week in kind of an MOE setup off of work that I had previously been working on. So not like from scratch, but it's a huge, huge leap for us on the engineering side.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think I do agree with you in a way that even the industry, like LLMs or like OpenAI, every company, their far-stretched goal to begin with was AGI, right? And then they said maybe there is a agents or MOE. This kind of setting will probably be another intermediary stage where we have self-learning or self-deterministic agents to do a lot of this decision-making tasks, and that might also probably help in the long run to lead towards AGI, because you need to have that somewhat intermediary system where we're not only relying on one prompt, or we're not relying on only fine-tuning the model, but we have to have a integrated system where agents can make decisions or powerful decisions for us, right? So it's interesting. I think I started playing with AutoGen that Microsoft has, right? So just right now, probably the simplistic version, even the simplistic version, I was seeing that, hey, instead of doing, for example, instead of doing a lot of prompts and chaining the prompt, I would rather just set up the agent environment and then let it decide based on the roles that we have defined in the meta prompt. Hey, who is going to be the next role player, or whose task is it coming up? And then they take on it, right? So that you don't have to now, have multiple pieces of code to handle the different prompts, chain it together. It does automatically. So it's just a simple use case. Also,
it's that like example you gave is fantastic, right? I think especially if you take it back to the data science world, right? Like there's a whole bunch of prep steps and things in data science and even post steps, right, on ML ops kind of flow that just sometimes aren't the most fun, right, to be honest. And I think if you have these agent systems, these mixture of expert systems, you can kind of handle some of that, right? And you can basically give it the guardrails. And the role or gamification kind of approach that you just walked through is so unique in this MOE setup. With agents, we've seen it in the past where you give it a reward, right? You say like, you did great, like here's a reward system, and it responds very well. In the mixer of experts, what I'm seeing, and even some of the research that I've been reading, the gamification piece works infinitely better, right? Because now you have all these competitive agents going against, and some of that could be a challenge in the future where they skew towards looking for higher reward versus the right outcome. And that's something that you have to think about as we build. But you're right. You create these roles, you build it. And I think we'll see other tools like AutoGen and other things come up. But I'm like a very strong believer. I can't imagine building without this, right? Like, and that's the crazy part is this is really just coming to the point where we're ready to use some of this. And I'm already of the mindset of like, I can't imagine not using this, which is exciting and worrisome in the same breath.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that means there is great potential, right? So the research is coming on, so we're looking forward for that for sure. So I think I would probably want to touch a little bit before we wrap up our conversation on the ethical AI or responsible AI. And I know you have when you did your executive master's program in the Brown, you said that was also one of the topics you covered. And then when we move, obviously in a fast pace or the LLM side, there's a lot of things coming up. I haven't still seen the very, very big projects on the full scale production yet, but it's coming along and they are trying to figure it out. But my, always fear being in a security industry, right? So we always have to consider the responsible side of it. And it's more tricky when it comes to this multi-agents or LLM side or AI side. So what is your thought process, how companies should put themselves in that position where they are doing it the right way? Let's say it that way, right? So
yeah, doing it the right way is a loaded term because I don't think there is a right way, to be honest. And I think that's the challenge, right? I think that's the really interesting piece, especially like I'll go 100,000 foot view first, like regulation. There's no right answer. People are like the EU AI Act was the first attempt in putting things, and I think they got some things right. I think they got other things wrong. I think they're prohibiting a lot of engineers from wanting to build in the EU because of the AI Act. But at the same time, I think what they've done puts a line in the sand of like, there will be repercussions if we don't take action on this now and make sure that there is some bias line or ethical line. So like the right way is very subjective. Now, I think of it in this term. I think that executive leaders at companies are the starting point for the ethical AI conversation. And what I mean by that is there's a whole bunch of things that they could control. One is training, AI training, right? And helping employees who are using it understand the risks of it, right? And so meaning you shouldn't put private data into a public closed, open AI system or Anthropic system because it will then train on that and that will be public data. Like basic things like that. That falls under the ethical umbrella to me, right? And so that's on the use side. We'll talk about build in a minute, but on the use side, I think executive leaders have an understanding of setting the parameters of toolkits for those that are building at the company to tap into and know and have common repositories to pull from. So like if you're building an LLM or if you're tuning or fine tuning or changing weights of an LLM, here's the toolkit you need to pull from, which is all vetted and predetermined and safety regulated or privacy reviewed. I think executives also have this ability to think about on the ethical side against with use is it shouldn't be a surprise that AI or generative AI will shift jobs, right? And by that, I mean like people's current roles will probably be taken over by AI in some time in the future. Like that's a scary thought, but it's also a realist thought. So I think executives on the ethical side have this determination of do they upskill employees or change skill employees to focus on something else and shift that focus? Do they allow for AI to take some of those jobs, or do they do something else with the talent when those jobs shift? So I think like on the ethical side, they have to think about that. On the actual building side, right? Humans are flawed vessels. Like that's just a common thing. Like we are flawed vessels and we have bias. And those biases come from, nature and nurture, right? So how you're, raised, where you're raised, your natural, instincts and abilities, like all of those things have bias in them. And so if you think about the engineering side, those are impactful in how we're building, right? And so I think there's positive and negative in that. Some of us, have good biases. Some of us have negative biases. They're all there. And so I think it's really important, again, to have those toolkits and understanding of what does bias look like. So helping people know what is anchoring bias, right? What is a whole host of these and understanding. I think the other really interesting side of this that I thought about. So when I, for my thesis, what I did is I built a system that took a whole bunch of common known biases, right? Some of it was demographic, ageism, sexism, a whole bunch of things.
Right.
And I put it into a utility that plugged into an IDE or a code system where you write code. And it looked for these and flagged them. And all it did was it would alert the user, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it said, this is a common bias, you should check about this, right? And so my thing was for, I wrote it for Bing, right? That was part of the data set that I had access to.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a toolkit, right? It was basically an alert for me as I was writing or others as they were writing to flag it. And I think that's a really important thing to just have awareness, because I think the common thing is no one goes in writing code and be like, I'm biased, I'm going to put, this bad code in. It's an awareness play. And so I think education on that integrated into the tools that we as data scientists or MLEs or engineers are using is such a needed element. And I don't think that I've seen anybody doing that yet. And I think it's a really, really important thing. The last is Microsoft does this incredibly well. I think every company needs to have some Office of Responsible AI or some community like Aether that they can tap into that sets knowledge and tone and guidelines and toolkits, and more so just has discussions, right, with employees and hosts like, forums where they can ask questions. Because the reality is, like, every engineer I've talked to that's working in the space is fearful, right? Because they're fearful of putting bias into something because they've seen the negative, like Microsoft had Tay back in the day. Like, I don't know if you remember the Tay bot that came out, but like, that's a great example of there was a ton of bias that was introduced, not realizing how evil humans can be on the internet, right? Of parroting that. And so the Office of Responsible AI, I think it's Natasha who leads that, right, is doing an amazing job of setting that precedent and talking with, government officials about regulation and things like that. And that is such a powerful thing for companies to do, where it doesn't have to be at that scale, but just have some forum where employees can ask or learn or get guidance from. It could be, a small group that does it. It could be a big group. But I think that's important. The last thing I'll kind of end with on this around like ethical AI, every company has their own ethics, right? Like that's just something important that we have to keep in mind as well. And I think it's really important that the leaders at these companies don't blend their personal ethics or their personal biases or beliefs into the biases, beliefs, and ethics of a company. They can talk about them and push them, but I've seen examples where it gets very dangerous, where you have, from a top-down view, biases or ethical beliefs that get distributed into the systems that are getting built. And so I think the separation of like leadership beliefs and views and company beliefs and views needs to be very clear, a line in the sand. I think for the most case, enterprise companies do a great job at that from what I've seen. I'm sure there are examples where not, but I think it's really important where we as builders are not parroting other beliefs that you see, because that's how you get these biased systems, right?
Yeah.
And once those systems are built, it's really, really hard to change. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where in a system you believe that has infiltrated or where it might not be built in the right way and pull it apart. I think, you get a front row seat of this in some of the security research you get done. Like you get to pull apart systems and, look for where is X. X could be a backdoor or a loophole or something. But on the AI side, like there's still so much we don't know on the generative piece, at least, about how transformers truly work, like where and how they're making those structured calls, that it's pervasive into the system once it gets built. And so that education up front and making sure that those builders truly understand the guardrails and guidelines that exist, and then also having a toolkit to help them monitor bias potentially, I think is, so important.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Thanks for highlighting all the important stuff around the responsible AI or ethical AI. And I do agree. That's one thing I like about Microsoft is also we want to build fast. At the same time, they want to make sure that we follow all these guidelines. And there is definitely a different group of people who's working. So every team or every org has a responsible AI champ, and you work with them. Once you have a product or POC that's going to production, that's one of the check point that you have to do it. And And some of it is like I went through the process myself for one of the products we had, and it was eye opener. A couple of things at least. They told us to, hey, get in touch with the red team, and then see how do you test all the prompts, meta prompts that you have set up to make sure that it's safe. It's not easily jailbreakable, or it's not easily injected, right? So with malicious prompts, so things like that. And it's simple thing if you look at it, because I was like, hey, yeah, I'm just setting up a conversational agent based on all the documents that I am passing it to. It's just a simple rack system. But the UI or web app, once I put in production, if it has a public IP, then anyone can write a prompt on it. What is your prompt guardrails? How are you filtering it out? And that's just one checkpoint before you pass the prompt to your model to make a decision, and it makes a difference. And I think those are some of the simplistic form of decision making to help on the ethical side, right? So there could be more, I think, as we talk the mixture of agent. And when you were saying a few things, in my mind, I was thinking, now we have a mixture of bias as well, because all of this, right?
Exactly.
So agents are trained in a different role plays, and we have the humans, who is writing the code. I think it's gonna be extremely complicated if you think about it, right? So, but if there are proper guardrails or guidelines at least, so I'm always proponent of setting up at least a small team. Doesn't really have to be a big team, right? To share that knowledge and help the team who is building, like ML team or engineering team, that hey, these are some of the things we have to make sure it's done, in this format. So at least doing something, in my opinion, is better than doing nothing, right? So
100%, yeah. And like when I talk about this in other settings, I have to remind folks that bias in code is not new. Like, this isn't because AI is at the, under the spotlight now that this is all of a sudden a new thing. Like, we've had code written for decades, and there's been bias in all of that. The difference in this is AI has an ability to see and speak and make determined outcomes on its own. And so
right.
The difference between where you could execute code and it would run and the bias might be there and you'd have an output. Now, what you write gets manipulated and transformed into something else. And that's where it's a compounding factor. And so like the need and the desire for my, belief, the desire to build an ethical system is so important, because as it gets compounded and these agents or these mixture of biases, as you say, get stacked on top of each other, it's just going to get more significant. And so, it's something I feel very, very strongly about.
Yeah. I think you have a perfect hoodie waiting today for this. The message is do good. Yeah,
that's right.
The best you can do.
Simple thing, but one of the hardest to act on. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right, so I think we will be coming close to an end. But before we do it, I have one more topic to cover, and
Sure.
It is how you blend your, life with the tech, right? And it's busy, it's hectic. As you mentioned, you are a father of, your kids. So I also feel the pain, of being, busy with them, not able to give some time sometimes. And your equation is, I think, more busier than me, because obviously of a startup, you have to make sure you are giving enough time so things are going the right direction. So what does Matt does in his free time, or at least to recharge or revive himself, right? So
so it's such a good point. I'm always looking for different ways to structure my life so I can have time back. There's two things. There's actually three things that I do to recharge. One is, over the last couple of years, I've become an avid runner. I find it's the one thing I can do where I don't have a screen, right? I don't have something I can look at. I run with music.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't run with a phone. I run with a watch, and it streams music and all of that. And I love it. It's probably the best self-alone time and deep thinking time I have. Sometimes I'll run with my AirPods in and no music, and I will dictate my ideas to Siri as I'm running. Like, I'll just have a conversation with Siri, and I'll transcribe everything as I run. And then I get this like, 2-page outcome of the ideas that I had when I'm running. Because for me, when I'm like deep into that flow state of run, like I get really creative. And so that's become a hobby. And now it's evolved into like really ultra marathon long distance runs, which is a different experience, but I get really recharged out of that. Like I love that piece. The second recharging is teaching, right? I love this
Yeah.
as I've picked it up over the years of, I call it like giving back. I learn a ton more than probably the students I engage with through this.
Yeah.
But I love that. It's a recharge for me where I get to have dialogue. I get to talk about concepts that, I've had experience with, but I'm still learning on, right? And have open engagement with students, right? And people who want to be in the learning scenario. So I love that. I get recharged by that. I wish I could do that much more. And then the third recharge piece is spending time with my kids. Like they don't care how bad my day was. They don't care, how many hours I've been awake, whether it's like 72 hours straight awake or whatever it is. They don't care.
Yeah.
All they want is to play or read a book or a hug. And I have gotten really ruthless with time prioritization to the point where I was starting to chunk my day into 15-minute increments of like, I'm working from these hours, I'm going to take these hours off, and in those hours off, I'm going to do 15-minute increments of like time with the kids for a chunk of that, time with my wife for a chunk of that, making dinner. Like that helped me. I don't do that any longer, but that helped me get this like very hard prioritization of could be doing all these things, but this is what matters at that moment. And so I'm very, very diligent, or maybe not diligent, I'm very cutthroat about my prioritization of time and where I spend it outside of the core working structure, right? And I think at a startup, there's no such thing as working hours. You kind of do a little bit of everything at all hours of the day. But those three are how I get recharge. And running primarily is like a very late night thing. Sometimes it's midnight. I'll go for a run, on the trail by our house. And teaching, sometimes I got to work on it at very early at like 4 a.m. to work on my curriculum. But like, that's what I get energy from, and you make time and you do it.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, definitely have some comments there. Like the running, I need to I don't do that often, but I like the way that you explain, like, how do you use the transcript? I mean, that's something new I learned. I mean, you just
It's so
listen
helpful.
Yeah.
It's so helpful. And like, like for me, I still find having the freedom to just, I call it word vomit. Like I'm just word vomiting things out, like stream of consciousness. And it just gets captured and transcribed. And like, it's so good. And, you have to focus on running and breathing, but you also focus on your thoughts. And so like this nice harmony of like the power of the human body.
Yeah. It's funny. It reminds me of one of the Navy SEAL story, I think. He downloaded all the negative or hate comments that was posted against him on the social media and all, and then he put that on the transcript, and then he listened to that, and he's like, that all those hate comments, it's just pushing him. So every time he's feeling tired, like, I mean, that's just going again. Like he's using the negative energy for the maximizing the positive side. So that's pretty wild, right? So,
yeah. I like that. It's
all right. So I think we came to an end. Definitely great conversation. I enjoyed it. I usually some of my past conversation go around 30-35 minutes, but this one went a little longer. But every minute was very learning and fruitful. So it was very nice to have you. Lastly, I think to close out, what is your advice for the either early career data scientist or just coming out of school, who is trying to figure it out in this world of AI, LLM, right? And they have a passion to get into the data science industry, but they are kind of feeling a little lost. So I do quite a bit of mentorship myself. And I've seen that you also have a passion to do teaching and mentoring. So that last bit of advice from you,
Sure.
We'll close that out with that.
There's two things, two, I think, very simple things. One is have a learn it all mindset of just because you think you know a topic, there's somebody who knows it even better than you, right? And there's things you continue to learn. So continue to educate yourself, whether you just graduated or you're early in a career. Like learn, pick up a book, go read an online forum, go take an online course, like continue to push yourself. The second is an even simpler one, which is network. Go on LinkedIn or go on Substack, find a topic you're interested in and find somebody who's talking about it and just send them a message, cold outreach. 99% of people will say yes, they have time to talk to you. Everybody's a little busy, so it might take some time, but network. That is how doors will open, and that is how you will become more familiar with the ecosystem you want to go into. So take advantage of that, of people's experiences, and really ask those questions. And, cold outreach can be intimidating at some points, but, the worst that happens is somebody says no. So network, like ask, learn, and focus. I think those are kind of the two very easy, big ones that I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I think the networking piece, as you tapped on, very important. I always tell my mentees that, hey, do not feel hesitant. I mean, like you said, the worst can happen is someone is not responding or saying no. If you don't do it, the answer is no already. So there's nothing to lose, right? So you just find your domain or the area you wanted to go, industry you wanted to go. Find those subjective filtering approach to find the potential match for your profile who can be your mentor or guide. So, and reach out, right? So there's nothing wrong. I built my own network, reaching out to many folks, so blindly, randomly. So, and fortunately, most of them say yes, actually. Surprisingly, they, like you said, I mean, they all are busy, but, even if they don't have time right away, of course, which is kind of like understandable, but you just have to keep building it. I mean, and network helps all the job seekers also. I've been telling the same thing. You have to build your network, and they will help you through referrals or connecting you to some other people. So it's just, the reason it's called network is everything is connected, and there's a power in connection, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
All right, Matt. I had a pleasure talking to you. It was such a nice conversation. I'll definitely catch up offline to learn more about other stuff like agents and stuff. And we'll catch up for a coffee sometime soon. And thanks for coming to my show, and I really appreciate it.
Yes, anytime. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to the next time you ask me to join.
Yes, of course we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.